Hello my friends, I am the Synodic Scribe, your caretaker in all things lore, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the things I've been playing through over the past month with Soulframe. Now, for those of you that don't know, Soulframe is one of the newest projects by Digital Extremes, makers of games like Warframe, and this game feels like it's going to be more of a high fantasy reflection of Warframe. Warframe is very sci-fi, extremely fast-paced, and just flying over the map, through space, doing all sorts of stuff with friends. This game, on the other hand, feels a lot, I guess you would say, slower, grounded, and rooted in a lot of European folklore when it comes to being rooted in mysticism, the Fae, and other magical phenomena. And since I was someone who not only was a founder for Warframe, but reached the rank of Grandmaster, I felt I might as well give this game its due diligence and play it through and see what I think about the development's current process. So, if any developers are watching this video, nice to see you, big fan, hope you all are having an amazing week. But before I get started, I feel like I need to point out something very important. This game is in a state called Alpha, or Pre-Alpha, I believe it's still in. Many gamers are familiar, or at least have heard of the concept of a beta, a game's beta release, or beta testing, and stuff like that. The thing about a beta is that, for the most part, at that point, the game is pretty much done. A 99% completed product, and at this point they're just making sure that certain settings like connectivity, server stress, and other things like that are working as intended and aren't going to absolutely melt everything when the game officially launches. An alpha, on the other hand, is completely different. If you are playing the alpha build of a game, you're technically not playing a game at all. You're playing something that could be a game one day. An alpha is an extremely important developmental phase during a game's production because this is the phase where developers are going to begin slowly building the game up, brick by brick, implementing new animations, activities, interactions, line by line, code by code, testing everything out to make sure it works before moving on to something else. Simply put, if they mess something up significantly during an alpha build, and that issue carries on into later developmental periods, well, that's how you end up with things like spaghetti code and massive glitches and errors that will be seen in a finished product. Now, not every studio or development staff handles their alpha build the same as everyone else. But so far, I have had the luxury of being able to experience the alpha build of Soulframe and get a feel for what kind of game this could eventually become if nudged in the right direction. So, what are my initial impressions of Soulframe so far? I'll start with the visuals. I honestly believe that if this is how the game looks just at the very start, then they can only improve from here. The use of more muted colors and earthy tones definitely grounds the setting a whole lot more than some of the more bombastic and neon colors of a game like Warframe, that's for sure. But I think visually what I'm most impressed with so far is their use of lighting. Anyone who's ever been camping before knows that the light will bounce off of the land in very unique and interesting ways during the morning, evening, and especially if there's a little bit of fog or mist rolling through a forest. And it feels like the developers have definitely taken the time to make these places feel more natural and lived in versus just slapped together and, hey, here's your high fantasy. Of course, there are some details on places and things that I feel could be made a bit more apparent. There are certain items and, like, say, treasure chests that almost melt into the background and are extremely hard to see sometimes, so might need to look at that a few times, who knows. But other than that, visually I think the game looks fantastic. At least for the phase that it's currently in. I only expect it to look better as time goes on. Next up is sound design and music. Warframe is well known for suddenly putting out sleeper hits, like We All Live Together and Sleeping in the Cold Below. And thankfully, it seems like Soulframe is going to hit the ground running with a lot of musical themes. Without any spoilers, I can say with confidence that music, or tones, is going to have a heavy impact in the lore of Soulframe. So if you're a big fan of how music was slowly evolving and being handled in games like Warframe, then you're likely going to be extremely pleased with the artistic direction it's taking in Soulframe as well.
I know this.
After all, music is one of those things that can be changed, improved, and just expanded upon as much as you want later down the line. You don't necessarily have to stick to a single musical style from start to finish, that's for sure. But speaking of lore, while there isn't much to learn at the moment because, well, why would there be? I did learn just enough that I could at least start making a few videos or theory videos surrounding the lore of this game, and I'd be happy to share my discoveries with you if you're interested at a later date. Be sure to let me know in the comment section below. I would happily discuss the Ladies of the Sun, Mora and Safine, the Man on the Moon, Iridis, as well as the various nature spirits and Ode antagonists. And believe me, for those who have played through the alpha as well, I understand the name of the big villain in this game being Synod is not lost on me, seeing that my channel's name is Synodic. And yes, there is a big difference between Synod and Synodic. Synod has to do with religious connotation, and Synodic has to do with astronomy, actually. So I'd be happy to explain that later if people were interested. Simply put, I was a massive space nerd when I was a little kid, and I picked up a lot of terms that I kind of just kept over the years. But with visuals, music, lore, and all things like that out of the way, I feel like I'm comfortable enough to start getting into some of the things that I would like to see improved / worked on in the future. And of course, the biggest thing I have notes on is combat. Essentially, combat is the only real thing you have to do in the game right now. You log in, run around the map, fight some enemies, maybe do a overworld mission or two where, again, you have to fight more enemies, and so on and so forth. So the Soulframe Alpha is very combat heavy at the moment, which makes sense. Ultimately, combat and exploration are likely going to be the bread and butter of this game. So they want to make sure that traveling the world and fighting in the world are just knocked out of the park as good as they can. But also, I want anyone listening to this to understand, I am fully aware that this game is not meant to play like Warframe. It is slower, it is more methodical, and you're going to have access to mechanics and skills that you otherwise don't really use in games like Warframe, which are extremely fast-paced, run and gun, and just melt a room before flying into the next one. This isn't that game, or rather, not yet. So, I understand. This isn't Warframe, it's a lot slower, so bear with me. So far, I have two major critiques for the combat so far in Soulframe. Number one, I understand that a lot of the missions and gameplay is likely going to be focused around teams and team combat at some point, much like its cousin Warframe in the future, but at the moment, in single-player instances, the enemies feel a bit too powerful. And what I mean by that is that it becomes extremely easy for a player to get stun-locked or chain-locked against enemies when they start to number in their threes, fours, and fives. When you become heavily outnumbered, it becomes far too easy of a tactic to just kind of run, kite the enemies, throw your weapon at them over and over and over again. It's less engaging with the combat and more just running around like a coward and hopelessly flailing your weapon at them from a distance to hopefully start picking them off one by one. It's extremely easy for the player to get staggered and slain when being challenged by so many different enemies all at the same time. But why do I feel that's a big problem? Simple. Because the animations that you take when dealing melee attack damage and stuff like that lock you out of being able to parry incoming attacks and, more importantly, dodge incoming attacks. Like, if the developers ignore everything else I say in this video and listen to just one thing, I would beg them to consider removing whatever boundaries or restrictions they have on defensive mechanics during attack animations. The player being locked out of things as simple as a dodge when in the middle of combat feels extremely restrictive. You're essentially telling the player that you only have two options: either go on the offensive or wait for the enemy and bait out a melee attack before striking. My question is, why not a third option? Why not encourage a player who has mastered the mechanics of this game to play more aggressively while also complementing a defensive understanding of the game's mechanics as well? Why not allow the player, if they see an attack coming and they hit the dodge button, they actually dodge? Otherwise, there's likely going to be a sizable chunk of players that feel unsatisfied with the flow of combat when they essentially have to stand still and wait to parry, wait to dodge. I disagree with this. You should be allowed to dodge and parry mid-attack animation to sort of reward you for your reaction time, for learning of enemies' animations, and feel like your combat prowess is actually being rewarded mid-fight, turning the flow of the battle in your favor. So, if nothing else, I really hope whatever is locking the players out of being able to perform certain actions mid-attack are removed or at the very least addressed. I really believe if this is looked at and scrutinized honestly, it will turn combat into a much more rewarding and engaging experience. And my second critique on combat is the weapons themselves. Now, I understand the weapons that we're dealing with in Soulframe right now are essentially at their earliest stages. I remember in earlier preludes, the bows that the player has access to actually had ammunition that you had to collect and use. And of course, you could run around with an empty quiver. However, the ammunition is gone now, or at least for now. Whether they bring it back or not, I don't know. But for the moment, bows essentially have infinite arrows, and whether they choose to stay with that or move on, hard to say. And I fully expect them to expand on what weapons are capable of in the future, especially since the throwing mechanic, where you're essentially able to throw your weapon and call it back like Thor with Mjolnir, that's really fun. I love that. But there's a problem here. Throwing the weapon and calling it back is so fun and so useful that it begs the question sometimes, why even fight in melee combat? And why would I question that? Simple, because some of the animations and attack profiles of these weapons feels stiff. Like the player is wading through molasses to land these strikes, and instead of flowing more naturally and just landing basic attacks with more swift blows. Like, for example, if someone's winding up a heavy attack to deliver a heavy blow, well, yeah, I totally expect it to be slower, more deliberate, and stuff like that. But if I'm attacking with like basic attacks over and over, I do not expect to see any kind of big wind-up, because why would there be? These are basic attacks. These are modest attacks. They need to flow better. They need to not be slowed down by these strange, dragging animations that make it feel like it should be like a heavy or staggering attack, when in reality, it's nothing special. So, those are my two big critiques on combat with Soulframe at the moment. I really hope the developers address the defensive mechanic situation and allow the player to, at the very least, dodge mid-attack animation. And of course, number 2, combat animations. I thoroughly believe that making these animations flow more thoroughly into one another will feel more rewarding, make combat feel less of a slow slog and more of a methodical dance against the NPCs. But beyond that, those are the only really big critiques I have for Soulframe at the moment. Like I said, this game is in alpha at the moment. In fact, the footage you've been watching through this entire video has been pre-alpha footage. Everything you've watched so far is subject to change. Nothing is guaranteed, nothing is promised. And I thoroughly believe that with a few helpful suggestions here and there to developers, maybe some cool and meaningful changes will be made to the game in the future. I, for one, loved, or technically still love Warframe with all my heart. And since the idea of a high fantasy setting with wizards and magic, which is more of my playstyle, is being made by a company that I already respect tremendously, I can't wait to see how Soulframe improves in the future, especially since we just got a weapon that uses sort of like magic and stuff. I really want to see them expand more on that weapon. Please, I'd be happy to help come up with ideas. But that will be all from me for now. I just kind of wanted to gush about my experience with the alpha so far before I start putting out videos about this game that may or may not showcase certain weapons, playstyles, and of course, tease a few nuggets of lore that exist in this game right now. So, to those of you that enjoy my content here, thank you so much for sitting around and hearing me talk about a game that I likely will play and may cover the lore of in the future. And if you're new to the channel and you're a possible future Soulframe player, by all means, come in, my friends. Sit down, subscribe to the channel, and let us discuss lore. But that will be enough of me rambling for today. I seriously hope you all are having an amazing week so far, and as always, stay safe, my friends.